In the frozen dawn sky over northern Europe, where the horizon glowed faintly with the first light of morning, and the icy wind howled across the wings of a lone Allied aircraft, slicing through the upper atmosphere, a pilot gripped his controls with white-knuckled intensity, unaware that within the next few minutes he would witness something so impossible, so mind-twisting, so violently against the laws of logic and survival that even decades later, historians, engineers, and pilots would fail to fully comprehend how he lived through it. And as his aircraft pushed deeper into enemy airspace, engines humming with a low, steady vibration that masked the subtle whispers of danger lurking just beyond the clouds, the pilot continued scanning the skies, his breath fogging inside the oxygen mask, heart pounding in a rhythm that beat like a warning drum, because every instinct he possessed, every shred of training, experience, and combat intuition built from countless sort, he had something was terribly unnervingly wrong. The kind of wrong that makes the hair rise on the back of your neck even before your eyes see the threat. The kind that makes your pulse spike before your brain understands why. And as he flew deeper, the clouds around him shifted into fractured shapes. Shadows stretching and breaking like reflections in shattered glass, the cold air slicing across his canopy, and the quiet tension building inside the cockpit becoming almost unbearable as he felt, without yet seeing that enemy fighters were nearby, ghosts in the mist stalking him through the jagged corridors of cloud, and suddenly, without warning, without sound, without even the faint glimmer of sunlight on metal, a violent, blazing streak tore across his peripheral vision, followed by another, like spears of fire thrown from the heavens. And the emergency alarms screamed through the cockpit as tracer rounds ripped past the aircraft, tearing into the sky with murderous intent, and his training snapped into action instantly, muscles reacting before his mind could catch up, jerking the control stick into a sharp, evasive dive, the aircraft groaning under the sudden pressure, wings shuddering as he dropped altitude in a desperate arc, clouds whipping past him in white streaks as he tried to evade the unseen attackers. And just as he leveled out, heart-pounding, breath-shaking, he saw them 3 enemy fighters diving straight toward him from above, engines roaring with predatory hunger, guns blazing, muzzle flashes blasting bright against the dawn sky, and he threw his aircraft into a brutal, twisting climb, forcing the machine to its limits, metal creaking, rivets straining, instruments vibrating violently. And as bullets ripped across his tail and fuselage, he realized with ice-cold horror that he couldn't outrun them, couldn't outmaneuver all 3 at once. Not in this position, not with this altitude, not with the sky closing around him like a tightening fist. And then, without warning, one of the fighters swooped across his left wing, so close he could see the pilot's goggles, the flash of determination in his eyes, the cold precision of a killer who believed victory was already his, and the enemy opened fire point blank. The gunfire screaming across the sky in a blazing torrent of metal, tearing through the wingtip of the Allied aircraft, sending sparks flying like fireworks, and the violent jolt knocked the pilot sideways, rattling the cockpit. Alarms blaring, metal tearing, smoke trailing, and yet he kept control by the thinnest thread, forcing his aircraft out of the spin, breath shallow, vision shaking, adrenaline flooding every nerve in his body. But it was in that exact moment, that impossible, dizzying, death-ridden second, that he saw something he could never forget. Something so shocking that for years he questioned whether it had truly happened, something that defied reason, physics, and even the boundaries between life and death, because as he looked over his shoulder, expecting to see the trailing smoke from the rounds that struck his plane, he instead saw something horrifying. His own aircraft, his exact aircraft being ripped apart in midair behind him, engulfed in flames, spiraling downward in a catastrophic explosion of fire and metal, as if a duplicate version of his plane had appeared behind him and been blown to pieces, as if time had split, as if reality had cracked open and shown him a glimpse of his own death unfolding just seconds behind his current position. And for one impossible moment, he saw himself or someone who looked exactly like him inside that burning cockpit. Arms flung upward, oxygen mask dangling, the figure framed in fire, destruction, and the shattering remains of an aircraft that should not exist, could not exist, and yet there it was. disintegrating in a blazing trail of smoke as the enemy fighters peeled away, the sky echoing with the violent roar of detonation. And the pilot, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed, felt a shiver of pure existential terror run through him, the kind of fear that goes beyond physical danger, beyond mortality, beyond anything a battlefield could inflict. Because what he saw was not just an enemy attack, it was a vision of his own end, as if fate had reached out across the sky to show him his death before it came. The image burned into his mind with soul-crushing clarity, and as he fought to regain control, every alarm in the cockpit blaring, smoke filling the air, controls stiffening, wings trembling, he realized with horrifying clarity that he wasn't just battling enemy fighters anymore. He was fighting time itself, fighting destiny, fighting the chilling possibility that he had just seen the moment of his own destruction seconds before it actually happened. And the dreadful question clawed at his mind, was he still alive? Or was he already witnessing his final moments play out in some twisted, looping fragment of reality? And this overwhelming, mind-splitting hook forms the explosive first minute of his unbelievable story. The story of the pilot who saw his own plane shot down while he was still inside it, still flying it, still fighting to stay alive, and the terror, confusion, and impossible mystery that followed would only grow darker, deeper, and more shocking as the journey unfolded. Asterisk. And as the impossible image burned itself into his memory, as the fiery silhouette of a plane that should have been his twin disintegrated into spiraling shrapnel and molten fragments that fell like blazing meteors through the clouded dawn sky, the pilot struggled to comprehend how he could be alive when he had just watched himself die. The contradictions tearing at his thoughts with a force more violent than the bullets that had shredded his fuselage. And he blinked hard, once, twice, trying to force the hallucination away. But the afterimage clung to his vision like a ghostly imprint, an echo of fire and death that refused to fade. And the chilling reality settled deep in his chest. This wasn't a trick of light, wasn't a reflection, wasn't a misinterpretation of smoke or debris. He had seen another version of his plane. Same shape, same markings, same damage patterns along the fuselage, same wing shape, same cockpit, silhouette, and even more horrifying. He was almost certain he had seen himself inside it, and his breath caught in his throat as the aircraft lurched again, a violent tremor rippling through the frame as he dodged another cluster of tracer, fire ripping through a cloud bank to his right. The enemy fighters still circling like predators who sensed confusion and weakness, their engines snarling as they closed in for the kill, and the pilot, fighting both the chaos outside and the chaos inside his mind, wrenched his aircraft into a spiraling dive, the horizon blurring into a smear of gray and black as centrifugal force pressed him against the seat, blood draining from his vision, his body screaming in protest as he pulled the machine down into a death-defying drop that left even the enemy pilots hesitating for a split second that bought him just enough time to break out of their firing arc, but not enough time to escape the deeper question that loomed like a shadow over his thoughts. If he had seen his own plane explode in the sky, what was he flying now? And more disturbingly, what had he just witnessed? A premonition, a parallel moment in time, a reflection from some atmospheric phenomenon, or something far stranger, something beyond the realm of wartime physics, something that even today cannot be explained by pilots, meteorologists, scientists, or historians. And as he leveled out from the dive, chest heaving with the effort, sweat streaming beneath his oxygen mask, he was hit by another violent tremor through the aircraft, this time from within, a mechanical shudder that rippled through the wings and into the controls, a sickening vibration that felt eerily similar to the moment before the other version of his plane had detonated. And his heart dropped into his stomach as he stared at the control panel, watching as one of the gauges flickered wildly, needle bouncing erratically between safe and catastrophic, and panic clawed up his spine as he remembered the fireball, the ripping metal, the explosion blooming like a deadly flower in the sky behind him, the destruction that shouldn't have existed. And his mind screamed at him that maybe he hadn't escaped that fate after all. Maybe the explosion he saw wasn't something that had happened to someone else. Some other plane, maybe it was something that was going to happen to him. Maybe he had witnessed his own future death seconds before the timeline caught up. And the thought flooded him with a primal terror deeper than anything he had ever felt in combat. A terror that made enemy tracers and dogfights seem trivial. Because how do you fight something you can't see, something you can't outrun? Something that exists outside the boundaries of physical combat. Something that feels like destiny itself tightening around your throat. And as the aircraft bucked again, smoke beginning to trickle from somewhere beneath the floor panel, the pilot gritted his teeth and forced the plane back into a climbing turn. Desperate to gain altitude to shake the enemy fighters still tearing through the clouds behind him, their formation tightening, their determination building. Because they too had seen the explosion, but unlike him, they didn't question it. They simply believed reinforcements had arrived and were taken down, unaware of the impossible truth behind the fiery spectacle, and the pilot, realizing that panic would only feed the chaos, forced his breathing into a steady rhythm, each inhale shaky but controlled, each exhale pushing away the suffocating fear. And he replayed the moment again in his mind, searching for any detail that could explain what he had witnessed, any scrap of logic that could make sense of the impossible. And yet every time he recalled the burning wreckage, the silhouette inside the cockpit, the shockwave rippling through the air, he felt the same cold certainty settle deeper inside him that what he had seen wasn't an illusion, that it wasn't a mistake, that the universe had allowed him for one terrible second to witness the exact moment of his own destruction, like a crack in time revealing its darkest secret. And as this realization gripped him, the pilot pushed his trembling hands against the controls, determined to outfly not only the enemy behind him, but the ominous premonition chasing him through the sky. Because if fate was trying to kill him today, he would fight it with every breath left in his body, every ounce of skill he had earned, every instinct sharpened by years of survival, and with renewed determination he banked sharply left, dropping into a cloud bank thick as smoke, hoping to lose the fighters, hoping to outrun whatever ghost or shadow or temporal echo haunted the sky behind him. But as he entered the cloud, everything went black and white, as if the world had drained of color, as if reality itself was flickering, glitching, folding around him, and his breath caught again as a new horror unfolded directly ahead. Asterisk in that impossible instant when the sky cracked open and time itself seemed to pause mid-breath, the pilot who only moments earlier believed he was securely guiding his aircraft home found himself, staring into a nightmare that no training manual, no simulator, no wartime briefing could have ever prepared him for. Because as he banked through a column of smoke thick enough to choke the horizon, he looked downward and saw the impossible. His own bomber, the same model, same squadron markings, same tail number, the very aircraft he was flying, being ripped apart by tracer fire thousands of feet below him, as if the universe had split into two conflicting realities, one where he still gripped the controls, and another where his fate had already been sealed. And those two realities were collapsing together in the violent thunder of flak batteries that bloomed like black, poisonous flowers across the Berlin sky. And in that moment he wasn't thinking like a soldier or a hero or a legend, but like a man whose mind was fighting its own logic. Because how could he be alive here and dead there? How could his plane be burning when he could still feel the vibrations of the engines under his boots? How could he watch the fuselage of his aircraft carve a flaming arc downward, as if dragging his own soul with it? And the radio hissed with chaotic voices that made the cockpit feel smaller, tighter, more suffocating. As he heard panicked cries from gunners who swore they'd just seen their lead bomber take a direct hit, yet he was the lead bomber, wasn't he? And that confusion dug into the back of his mind like an icy knife, because maybe, just maybe, they weren't seeing his plane from another angle but some warped reflection of fate twisting itself around him. And every second he remained airborne felt like he was defying a script already written in fire below him. So he pushed the throttle harder. Not to escape the enemy fire, but to outrun the haunting question that threatened to break him. Was he witnessing his future, or his past, or a version of himself that had already died? And the engines roared in sympathy with his panic, metal rattling, glass trembling, oxygen mask fogging with frantic breaths, while outside the sky turned into a maze of falling aircraft, each one spinning like a doomed thought he couldn't outrun. And yet every time he blinked, he saw that same image, his bomber. His tail number, his symbol, his identity spiraling downward. And no matter how wide he climbed, or how sharply he turned, that burning wreck stayed in his vision as if it were tethered to his consciousness, pulling him, taunting him, reminding him that the sky allows no mistakes and accepts no explanations, only outcomes, and each heartbeat echoed louder than the engine pistons, louder than the gunfire, louder than reason itself, until it felt like his own body was being yanked between dimensions. One alive, one dead, one surviving by seconds. One already swallowed by the fire below, and he wasn't sure anymore whether he was fleeing death or chasing it, because something deep inside him whispered that if he didn't understand what he was seeing, if he didn't confront it, then the same fate would claim him. Not later, not someday, but now, in this very minute, suspended between existence and oblivion. And as he squinted through the smoke at the burning aircraft below, he realized with a shock that froze his veins that the silhouette of the pilot inside that doomed bomber looked eerily like him. Seated in the same posture, hands on the same controls, head turned in the same frantic angle as if he were watching himself die in real time. And that horrifying mirror image lodged itself in his mind so deeply that he almost forgot to breathe, because the thought that he might be witnessing some kind of aerial premonition or punishment burrowed into him with relentless force. And the sky, once merely dangerous, now felt like the stage of something supernatural. Something that didn't care about logic or physics or sanity, only about delivering a message he could not yet decipher. Asterisk, and as he forced his bomber higher into the thin, freezing air where the world became a pale smear of clouds and smoke, the sense of unreality only sharpened. Because even though he knew his engines were laboring, overheating, rattling as if the bolts were loosening with every second, he couldn't shake the image burned into his mind, a burning version of his aircraft descending like a meteor. And every part of him expected that at any moment his own bomber would suddenly stutter, cough, or explode in the same violent burst, as if the sky were trying to synchronize his fate with the one he had witnessed below. And the longer he flew, the more he felt the cockpit warping around him, shrinking, twisting, distorting like the inside of a dream that had turned hostile. And the instruments on the panels seemed to flicker in ways he'd never seen before, needles trembling as if reacting to some unseen force instead of altitude or speed. And even the cold metal of the yoke felt different beneath his gloves, less rigid, more alive, almost pulsing, as if reminding him that he was not escaping anything but drifting deeper into some kind of aerial hallucination wrapped in reality. And then the gunner behind him screamed over the intercom, not a scream of pain, not a scream of being hit, but a scream of pure primal terror, because through the upper turret, he too now saw the burning bomber falling below them. And what made the scream more chilling was the fact that his voice cracked when he shouted the tail number. Because it wasn't just similar, it was identical. Digit for digit, symbol for symbol, placement for placement, as if the universe was holding up a replica of their aircraft and crushing it in slow motion before their horrified eyes. And the pilot's blood went cold, because hearing someone else confirm the impossible made it real, undeniable, inescapable. And suddenly he felt gravity tug at him in a way that suggested more than physics, like fate itself had hooked a claw into him and was dragging him toward whatever truth lay inside that falling wreck. And he fought the instinct, pulling the yoke back, climbing harder, determined not to be sucked into the same doom. But the more altitude he gained, the more the burning bomber seemed to rise with him, as if chasing him, as if refusing to stay dead, as if demanding that he acknowledge it. And then, through the flickering flames engulfing its fuselage, he saw something that made his entire world collapse inward. The pilot in that burning cockpit was looking up, not forward, not at the ground, but up, directly at him, through smoke and fire and impossible distance. And though he told himself it was just the angle, just a trick of light, just shadows bending through heat waves, He knew deep down that what he'd seen wasn't random, wasn't accidental. Wasn't something he could dismiss, because the posture, the shape, the outline, it was him, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but him, as clear as seeing his reflection in a shattered mirror. And for a second, the shock was so overwhelming that his hands froze on the controls and the bomber dipped dangerously, nearly slipping into a stall. But even as his training kicked in and he corrected the angle, he felt a terrible awareness rising inside him like an approaching storm, whispering that reality was thinning around him, that he was no longer fighting the Germans below, but something far stranger, far more personal, something that wasn't trying to kill him but warn him, or perhaps claim him. And as the burning bomber fell out of sight beneath the clouds, swallowed by the smoke-choked void over Berlin, he had the horrifying sensation that it hadn't disappeared, it had merely gone ahead of him, waiting for him somewhere beyond the horizon. Somewhere he would eventually reach, whether he wanted to or not, because some fates don't chase you. They wait patiently for you to catch up. And the wind howled against the glass like a living voice whispering that what he had witnessed wasn't a hallucination or a trick or a coincidence, but a message written in fire. And the worst part wasn't understanding what the message meant yet, but knowing with complete certainty that he would, and that the sky would make sure of it no matter the cost. Asterisk. And as he steadied the trembling bomber, fighting turbulence that felt less like weather and more like the sky, trying to pry him loose from the controls, he kept replaying the impossible image of the burning aircraft falling beneath him. The identical tail number glowing through heat and smoke like a message carved in fire. And no matter how hard he tried to rationalize its stress, exhaustion, oxygen, starvation, battle shocked his mind, betrayed him with the undeniable memory of his own silhouette sitting inside that burning cockpit, staring back at him with a calmness that made the entire moment even more horrifying. Because it wasn't panic he had seen in that mirrored pilot's face. Not confusion, not fear, but a kind of resigned understanding, as though the version of him inside the doomed bomber already knew something he had yet to grasp, something inevitable and final, and the realization clawed at him like cold fingers inside his skull, tightening, twisting, forcing him to confront the possibility that the sky was bigger, stranger, and far less predictable than anything he had been trained for. And even as he pushed toward the clouds ahead, each billowing mass lit faintly by the moon like drifting monuments of ice, he felt the uncanny sensation that he was flying into a corridor not of air, not of weather, but of time itself. A narrowing passage where every second stretched thin and every movement echoed with consequences he couldn't see yet. And the bomber groaned beneath him, as if resenting being dragged into whatever fate awaited them beyond the next bank of clouds. And the crew, sensing something wrong not with the aircraft but with him, spoke in hushed tones, their voices thin, brittle, tinged with fear, as though they were passengers in a world they no longer understood. And when one of them finally asked if he was all right, he lied automatically, instinctively, with a steady voice that didn't match the chaos burning inside his mind. Because how could he explain that he had just watched himself die? Or rather watched a version of himself fall, burning into the ruins of Berlin. And the thought gnawed at him with teeth of cold iron, because if that burning pilot was him, then what was he now alive, dead, or trapped somewhere in between? Flying through a sky that wasn't sky anymore, but a distorted reflection of possibilities, each one waiting to consume him. And he pushed the throttles forward to escape the thought, to escape the fear. The engines screaming in protest as though they too sensed that he was trying to outrun something that could not be outrun. Something that was already inside the bomber with him, hiding in the vibration of the fuselage, in the flicker of the gauges, in the hollow echo of the sky itself. And as he climbed into a higher layer of clouds, thick and bright like fresh snow smashed into vapor, visibility collapsing into a suffocating whiteness that blinded every direction, he felt a sudden drop in his stomach, not from altitude, but from the chilling awareness that the burning bomber had reappeared, not below him this time, but ahead of him, materializing like a phantom drifting out of the glowing fog, flames frozen in impossible slow motion, debris suspended in the air like sparks trapped inside ice. And though every instinct screamed to bank left, dive right, escape any way possible, He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink, because once again, he saw that same impossible pilot inside the burning cockpit. Only this time the figure wasn't staring blankly, wasn't resigned instead. It was raising a hand, slowly, deliberately, as though signaling him with a gesture that hit him harder than any flak or bullet ever could. Come closer. And the meaning of that silent gesture twisted through him like a knife made of pure dread. Because it wasn't a warning, wasn't a plea, wasn't a farewell no. It felt like an invitation, a demand, a command written in smoke and destiny. And in that moment, the bomber shuddered violently, alarms screaming, lights flickering, metal rattling as though the sky itself had begun collapsing inward, swallowing physics, swallowing reason, swallowing everything except the impossible truth that he was flying into the path of his own destruction. A destruction that already happened. A destruction waiting to happen. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of fear and disbelief, a darker thought took shape, whispering that perhaps what he had seen wasn't his death, but the beginning of something far worse. Asterisk, and as the pilot pushed forward into the final stretch of the impossible flight, with the engines coughing and trembling like dying animals and the wings groaning under the accumulated damage of flak, storms, and supernatural terror, he felt something shift in the air around him in almost imperceptible distortion, a tightening of the sky itself, as though he were approaching the boundary between everything he understood and everything humans were never meant to witness. And the bomber, battered and exhausted, seemed to sense it too, vibrating with an unnatural rhythm, its metal skin humming like a tuning fork struck by unseen hands, and the crew, pale, silent, wide-eyed, clutched their seats as if the aircraft were no longer flying through air, but through a thick, invisible current dragging them toward an unknown destination and deep inside the pilot's mind. Beneath the fatigue, beneath the terror, beneath the disbelief, single truth crystallized like frost on glass. He was no longer escaping Berlin. He was being summoned, pulled by a force that had taken the shape of his own burning bomber, the identical phantom plane that had appeared again and again, guiding him, haunting him, mirroring him. And as the clouds thinned and the horizon stretched open like a doorway flooded with cold morning light, he saw the shape once more, drifting silently ahead. No flame now, no smoke, no destruction, just a spectral silhouette gliding with impossible smoothness. Its wings unbroken, its fuselage unscarred, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. And he felt his pulse slow, his breath deepen, his senses sharpen, as though some part of him, some ancient instinct buried beyond logic, recognized what was happening. Recognized that he was no longer chasing survival, but confronting destiny. And as the phantom aircraft began a slow, deliberate descent toward a stretch of empty fields far beyond enemy lines, the pilot found his hands moving without conscious command, guiding his wounded bomber along the same gentle arc, matching the ghost plane's glide inch for inch, as though both aircraft were tethered together by an unseen thread stretching across time, reality and fate. And the closer he followed, the clearer he saw the cockpit of the phantom plane, saw the pilot seated inside, motionless yet aware, the same face as his own, yet older somehow, more weathered, more hollow, eyes filled with a kind of knowledge that chilled him deeper than any winter wind. And the nearer they drifted to the ground, the more he felt the boundaries between the two planes dissolving, merging, aligning, as if the sky itself were collapsing, the divide between what had happened and what might happen, between life and death, between memory and prophecy. And the crew whispered behind him, barely audible, their voices trembling with fear and awe, asking what the plane was, who was inside it, whether they were seeing a miracle or a warning or something infinitely worse. But the pilot couldn't answer, couldn't speak, because every fiber of his being was focused on the impossible realization that the moment he touched the ground, the moment his wheels hit the earth, something irrevocable would occur, something that would rewrite everything he understood about the mission, the war, and himself. And as the phantom bomber extended its landing gear with a silence that defied physics, drifting ever lower toward the unknown field, the pilot's heart pounded pounded with a force that shook his entire body. His breath coming in sharp, cold bursts as he felt time itself tightening around him like a noose. And in those final seconds before landing, as the ground rushed upward and the sky stretched downward like two worlds closing in on him, he saw the phantom pilot raise a hand one final time. Not beckoning now, not warning, but pointing, directing him toward something. Behind the tree line, something hidden, something waiting. And the instant his wheels touched, the ground jarring, violent, metal screaming in protest, a shockwave of realization thundered through him. A revelation so staggering that his breath froze, his vision narrowed. And he understood in a single devastating moment that the plane he had been following was not a ghost. Not a hallucination, not a trick of exhaustion or fear, but a message from a future he was never meant to survive. A future that had already seen what would happen to him if he stayed in Berlin. A future desperately trying to pull him away from a fate he had narrowly escaped only by the thinnest thread of time collapsing in on itself. And as his bomber skidded to a halt, engines dying, silence falling like a shroud, he stepped out onto the cold, unfamiliar ground with trembling legs. Staring at the empty field where the phantom aircraft had just landed, now vanished without a trace. He felt the crushing weight of the truth pressing down on him. Because the war, the mission, the sky, everything he thought he understood was now rewritten forever by the terrifying knowledge that he had witnessed the moment of his own death. And the version of himself that died had dragged him across the sky to save him. And as the rising sun painted the horizon in blood-red light, the pilot realized that this story, his impossible, haunting fate, bending journey, was far from over, because whatever force had intervened once could intervene again. And the sky above him no longer felt like freedom but like a warning, a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, and some miracles are not gifts but debts, and the final, heart-stopping hook that keeps viewers trapped until the last second hits with devastating clarity. If the sky showed him his own death once, what will it show him next?